and I wanted to do something that nobody expected, that nobody had done in New Orleans before. Everything was Saint-centric, everything was LSU-centric, football-focused. And I had this passion for basketball first and foremost, but
Okay.
also just for these deeper conversations in sports. I wanted to talk about sports law. I wanted to talk about gender politics in sports. I want to talk about stadium financing. I want to talk about all of those things. And 2019 ended up being the perfect time to do that for all the things that ended up happening in 2020.
So one of the million reasons why I enjoy doing this podcast is connecting with people and learning about them, their journeys, as well as learning common interests. Today, I have one of my fellow NABJers, and that is the one and only Mr. David Grubb. Now, David has made a lot of history, as he'll talk about on today's show, including being the first ever Black daily sports host in the history of New Orleans. He is also one of the founding fathers of MLBBro.com. And if you're a baseball fan like myself, like David, you can really appreciate that site, especially because you get to learn more about the different Black players. So, ladies and gentlemen, here is my conversation with the one and only Mr. David Grubb. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as promised, I have one of the best broadcasters, one of the most history-making broadcasters I'm super excited to talk to. That is the one and only, my NABJ brother, the one and only Mr. David Grubb. Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, and just busy like you, man. Just staying busy. It just never ends. It's 365.
That's facts, man. Before we get started in today's show, I just wanted to do a check-in. How have you been? We get ready to transition. Well, we in spring now, but we're getting out of winter, and how you been overall?
I've been good. I got my daughter is finishing up her freshman year of high school.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always a big thing, a transition for her, and just watching her grow up and then taking on some new challenges professionally. Some real exciting things happening for me. So it's tough, when you're doing this in this industry, but this feels like one of those years where a lot of good things are going to happen.
Nah, I feel you, man. What kind of advice can you give to somebody because like next year will be my son's first year in high school. What kind of advice can you give? I'm asking that on the pod right now.
Listen, that was the biggest thing. It's like it was a really hard adjustment the first couple of months for my daughter, coming out of that shell of middle school where you're kind of protected and going into high school and being around 16, 17, 18-year-olds. And, it took her some time to find her place. Mm-hmm. So I just had to really be, listen to her every day. What's going on with you? How do you feel? And just helping her find her place and get adjusted was the biggest thing. So, I just tried to listen and try to listen as much as I can and be a resource rather than trying to push her through it. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to like, when you take your kids to the bowling alley and you bring up the little bumpers for them when they're young.
Yeah.
That's my approach. I'm the bumpers. They're going to bump up against the side every now and then. It ain't going to be the perfect role, but my job is to keep her out the gutter. Keep moving forward, but I keep you out the gutter.
Yeah, that's definitely understandable, man. But so let's get right into your career. When did you know that you wanted to get into media and communications?
It was weird because really it was probably something that was in my heart always. Mm-hmm. I was always that person in high school that even when I was on the basketball team, the coach would have me write the morning announcements for the team after the game and read everything off because, I was good at that. And he had me work with guys who were the stars of the team. So like when we would win games, he'd like, tell them what to say. So, those things should have been there. But I thought I was going to be in business when I got to college, my first year at Wake Forest. And then I just realized I wasn't being true to me. I knew that I had a voice, but I didn't know what exactly I wanted to do with it. So like television seemed like the right thing at the first time. I wanted to get into sports. I wanted to talk. So television seemed like the thing. And I kind of just got involved with campus television, and started going from there and getting some internships. But it really was kind of just, it should have been something that I always knew, but you just don't think of it if you haven't been exposed to it. And I didn't have people who were broadcasters in my family or around me. So it was kind of something that I just had to discover on my own.
Oh, okay. Now, what led you to Wake Forest?
It's weird because, you grew up in New Orleans, you ain't really thinking about Wake Forest University. That's not one of those places. It's a very small school. At the time, I think it had only like 3,100 total students, and it's still the smallest school amongst all the big Power Five schools. I knew of it as a basketball, just for basketball. Rodney Rogers at the time, Muggsy Bogues. I knew those names, and they recruited really hard. They came to New Orleans, and they didn't have a lot of people from Louisiana, and three people from my high school, me and two of my very closest friends that I'd known since one that I'd known since third grade, the other since fourth, and we all ended up going, adding three to the Black campus population. And I liked Wake Forest because it was small, and I went to a really small high school. We didn't even have 100 graduates in my high school, so I like the small environment. I like the isolated kind of nature of Winston Salem. It wasn't in a big city, and it was the I think the small Black community on campus was enticing too because I knew everybody, and that was a lot more positive before you got to college. Everybody knowing you ain't really as positive once you get to school, but it was a cool thing to think about before I got there.
Now, you was there when Tim Duncan was there too, right?
Yeah, we came in same year as freshmen, and it was that's like the peak of Wake Forest basketball. Randolph Childress led us to back-to-back ACC championships. The famous come here to Jeff McGinnis after he broke his ankles, and then Timmy being the number one player in the country for 3 straight years, essentially. It was a really great time, just to get to know Tim a little bit, and still, when I did get to see him, obviously he's retired now, but he was with the Spurs for a little while as an assistant, and I got to see him a couple times, and it's just for a while I knew I was young as long as Tim was still in the NBA. But then
Oh,
once he retired, then it's like, okay, I'm officially old now because Tim's on Hall of Fame watch. So it was a lot different then, but it was cool because there are very few times, I guess, in life when you kind of walk the same path as people who end up making these big marks in history in one way or another. And there were a lot of those people around campus at that time, and Tim just happened to be the most famous.
man, that's really cool. Now, what kind of now you went there for you like you said you found what you supposed to be, found who you were. What kind of projects did you get a chance to do in college? Because a lot of times we hear about the newer school projects, and by any means, I'm not calling you old, but I'm interested in learning, and I know the audience is, what kind of like work did y'all do, going to college in the 90s as far as, internships and school papers and stuff?
Yeah, we had just started a campus TV station, when I got there. So it was 1993 to 97, and Wake Forest just got a campus TV station, I think, in 94. So even my freshman year, we didn't have it. And so I just volunteered, and I started hosting a show called Deacon Sports Week. And we had an agreement with the local NBC affiliate. They would send us their raw footage that they shot during the week of our whatever Wake Forest sports that they had, so we could cut our own stories from there and do our own interviews on campus and whatnot. And that was really where I started to learn. I took classes in TV writing because writing for TV is very different. And then my first real internship was with WVUE in New Orleans in 1996, the summer of the Olympics. And I got to do a lot. It was from editing to writing stuff for on air, conducting some interviews, going out and doing any stuff. I couldn't be on camera obviously as an intern, but I got to do VOs and write some VOs and help with some packages for other reporters. So it was a lot of hands on stuff, and but it was free. You had to come in every day for 7-8 hours in the summer, and I didn't even get college credit for it. So everything was out of my pocket. I had to work a second job to have my gas money to be able to go to my internship.
Mm.
But the great thing was that the journalists that I got to work with, the anchors and the producers, they were all really giving of their time. And I think the main thing has always been in a newsroom is if you're willing to work and listen, people are willing to help you. It's just you can't slow down the process. And once you learn that a newsroom is just a constantly churning organism that you have to figure out the energy of it and where it's moving and how to fit in. And once I figured that out, it was really an enjoyable process and just going through it and getting to fail and having mentors who pushed you out there and said, just do it. I'm not going to tell you how to do it other than the basics. You push these buttons and you do this. This is what you do. The rest of it, I want you to figure out so you find your voice. And so I was really fortunate to have great mentors in that regard who didn't hold my hand too much, and held me accountable and let me grow.
Man, you said a gem right there. Being an intern, you can't slow down the process, and I think that's key. And it's something I wish I would have like heard years ago, and not so much just for myself, just more so like being somebody who mentors a lot of up and coming, whether it's journalists, producers, or media relations specialists. Because like when I was at Johns Hopkins in media relations, our best interns was exactly that. Those who didn't slow down the process, they just kind of got in and it was a fast pace, but not as fast paced as news, but it could be fast paced as far as turning around things. But one of the things you did a lot of was speaking of like media relations and corporate communications. You was on that side for a while. Can you just talk about your experience with corporate communications?
Yeah. I was in television and you get to that point where it's kind of like I was making minimum wage, basically, $25,000 a year and living in Massachusetts, staying in an efficiency apartment. And you get to that point where it's just like, this struggle is too much, just financially. So I said, and I wasn't feeling comfortable in television at the time because one of the things you have to understand, and people who get into TV, I don't think you get this until you're actually in it, is when you get into TV news, especially sports, you think you
Mhm.
got time. You get you get 3 minutes in a broadcast on a weekday, 3 minutes. And weather goes over, that's 30 seconds out your broadcast. News gets a breaking news story, that's another 30 seconds. And so you don't really get to a lot of time except in your packages. And that may be two a week. When you're working on a full staff, you're doing mostly both sides. And so when you're an anchor, you just don't get a ton of time. And so that was kind of frustrating is that, I got into this because I wanted to have a voice, but I felt like I was regurgitating more than not. And, that was my thing. There are
Mhm.
plenty of people that make it work. It just didn't work for me. And so I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And so I came back from Massachusetts, went back to New Orleans, and I got into public relations, working on some political campaigns at first because I said I needed something I believed in, and that was something really easy to get involved with is politics because I had a passion for my community and wanting to help. So I got involved on that side first, and that led to some corporate opportunities. People saw what I did, um, working for Paulette Irons, who at the time was had a chance to be the first woman to be mayor of New Orleans. She ended up finishing third. I worked for Ray Nagin in the runoff. He became mayor of New Orleans, um, and then that led to some opportunities in the private sector. I ended up doing public relations and marketing for some major companies, Tabasco, Zatarans, and writing commercials for some title loan companies, some commercials that I'm glad that don't exist anymore in circulation.
Mhm.
But where, at the time I enjoyed copywriting because it was kind of cool to step into somebody else's voice and write for them. Um, and after a couple of years of that, then again, it was like again, I was saying stuff for the wrong people, and I was still trying to find my voice. And so, Hurricane Katrina happened, and that changed everything because while I was evacuated for Katrina, I didn't know what I was going to do because we didn't know if we were going to go back to New Orleans or not. I didn't know what the city was going to be like. I didn't know if I was going to have to move for good. And so, um, maybe a week, when we were trying to figure out what was going to happen in the city, I got a call from some people who said they're trying to open the schools, and they were looking for people interested in helping. And I was like, I didn't really know what kind of role I could have, but I asked if they had a communications person. I drove back and forth between North Carolina and Louisiana 3 times for interviews. And finally, they asked me to come in, and I ended up being the communications director for Algiers Charter School Association, which was the first schools to open up after the storm. And I know there's a lot of issues on charter schools, but at the time, it was the only schools that were going to open. And that was important to me to get schools open in the city. And I did that, ended up working for the Louisiana Department of Education after a couple of years of that. Was director of communications there. And I loved working in the education space and impacting change that way. So after working at the state, just there was some changes there. And I found that going back again to the campus side was something that I really wanted to do. So I ended up working at Southern University of New Orleans for a few years, and then Dillard University, and really having a lot of success for both of those campuses, working in PR and getting messages about HBCUs back out. And to see now where we are 10 years later, 15 years later from when I started doing that, and how much more attention is on HBCUs, I was glad to really have a place in that, and help create some real wins for Dillard University in particular while I was there, on the communication side, and bring our story to a lot of people who didn't know it before.
Wow, man, that's amazing. Like, just sitting here listening to your story, and even dealing with Katrina, like it's it's something like being in Baltimore, you hear about it, but like as I grow, Maya Jones is like a good friend of mine, and I remember when we first met when I worked at ESPN, I got to hear her journey and everything, and like hearing yours, and going back and forth, and you having what I mean, like a direct impact on reshaping and recreating the area. I think is amazing. Especially in education. I love the passion that you have.
What up? It's your boy Blue Magic, owner of For Your Wear and one half of the Mixed Tag Show. Now, I know you've seen the announcement from some of your favorite podcasts in wrestling. I've decided to expand my business to become a vendor so that people from the wrestling community have a better way to communicate with some of their favorites. So check out foryourwear.com and see if your favorite podcast on wrestling has partnered up with me. If not, let them know that they should. Also, if you're looking for a vendor for your merchandise, reach out to me at Blue Magic Grind, spell how it's found on Twitter and Instagram, or at For Your Wear, FORURWEAR, on Twitter and on Instagram. Shout out to Brian H. Waters and Breaking Through Glass Ceilings. Their merchandise are already up, and they're one of the first one that's reported, so go support them. All right? Peace.
I want to ask you, when did you know it was like time to really get back into sports? Because like this is where we can kind of relate, where I was at Johns Hopkins for 5.5 years, and the opportunity with the Ringer came up, and boom, I'm in wrestling full time, and I'm seeing all the work that you're doing. I mean, we're gonna get into it, but when did that transition come? When did the light bulb go, or what was the opportunity for you, and when did the call come and it said, David Grubb, it's time. It's time for you to get back in sports and really deliver, because obviously you had a passion for it. You said it
Mhm.
in high school. You was telling the players what to say. You was basically being an in-person PR rep. And I mean, I've never heard that before. Like I've heard Stephen A. Smith say when he got hurt, he could. They told him, "All right, well, you can't. You like to talk. Be a journalist." But you were on the team. You were telling the star player, "Hey, so when you get an interview, this is what you do." And that was unheard of back in the day. Now it's more common. So when did the opportunity come for you to get back out there?
So I was working at Southern University of New Orleans. I was director of communications and community relations at the time, and we didn't have a sports information director in our athletic department. And if you know HBCU campuses, there's a lot of times where people are taking on multiple roles in departments that aren't related because it's just the economic reality. And so I took the role on, and I was glad to do it, because I got to be around these athletes. And when you're at the NAIA level, they're not given a lot. They get their scholarships, And people think that that's, again, that everybody who gets a scholarship is living it up. And no, I knew that these were kids, some of them were a little bit older, who had come back to school. Some of them were, this was, they're fresh out of high school, and this was their opportunity to continue to pursue their dream. And I got to meet them and travel with them and learn their stories. And it just became more and more interesting to tell the stories. And I started getting that itch again. I was writing stuff for the website and for the conference for them and everything. And I was just like, I want to do more. I said, I don't know who to talk to though. Who do I talk to? And we happened to have a vendor come in who, folks trying to get you to advertise on their stations and whatnot. And somebody came in and we were just talking about sports. And I said, I kind of would like to get back into sports again. And he was like, I know somebody you should call. And a journalist that I knew from just in passing, he was starting up his own sports website. And at the time it was called sportsnola.com. And he was just trying to do an independent site, and they needed somebody to cover LSU. And I was living in Baton Rouge, and that's where I still live right now. And he was like, hey, you want to cover LSU for us? And I started doing LSU football to get back, my feet wet. Then it turned into LSU basketball. Then it turned into LSU baseball. And then it was the Pelicans. And then just more and more, it just started to become a part of what I was doing when I wasn't working. And I was putting more time into the stuff. And I was still putting 16 hours a day in at Southern. But the other if I wasn't sleeping, I was writing or going to games or doing whatever. And I was just loving it. And I just felt like I was missing that connection. And so I just kept taking on as more and more. And eventually, the working at the university was in the way of me working in sports. And I just went into my boss one day and I was smiling as big as I could. And he was like, why are you smiling? I said, because I'm quitting. and we had the conversation. He was like, I get it. I get it. He wasn't mad because he was like, I can see that you're doing what you really want to do. And he could tell, I was taking afternoons. I was like, I got to put in some free time, my time, because I got to go to this event and I'll do that. And he was just like, he understood. And then at that point, I think everybody around was like, yeah, that's what you should be doing. And so I just put that commitment in full time. And for the last 5-6 years, it's been a full-time thing.
Wow, man. It's I think when you was at sportsnola.com, I think that's the first time I came across your name. Like, it was because I was looking at you. So, full disclosure, I was never a big Ben Simmons guy. I just like, I kept seeing like, okay, this guy's the next LeBron. I'm like, well, why isn't he? To me, I guess it was just like the aggression, right? And I didn't see it, so I'm like looking up stuff, and I think that's when I first came across your name. But to see you go from there now, just talk about like your time at Sports Nation, because at one point, like I know you were there for a while, and that was one of the. So when I was at ESPN, that was like one of my cheat sheets for social. So you talk about your time there and writing there.
SB Nation was real cool. Getting to get with the bird rights. That was my first like national kind of exposure as a writer. And that first year, I got recognized like a bunch. It was a number of articles that ended up getting recognized either by SB Nation, like best of, things like that. And I remember that first year just doing some stuff with the Toronto Raptors, the NBA TV, just like, and it was just, for me, it was a shock, because I didn't think I belonged on that stage. I was just getting in. But that also was reaffirming too. It was like, okay, yeah, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, because people are responding to it right out the gate. And it just put me into places that I had never been and into conversations that I hadn't had. And then all of a sudden, I was really much more emboldened when I walked into locker rooms or to practices to ask my questions.
Okay.
Because I was getting my response, and having that kind of name behind you that authenticity. It's different when you're an independent. People kind of view you. You know how you get the blog guy, and people think you just do this as because you got a hot take to get out.
Yep.
But I was a journalist. I was trained as a journalist, and I wanted to be the best journalist that I could be. So having SB Nation got me that credibility and gave me access in a way that I hadn't had it before. And it was, a really important couple of years there because it got me into podcasting, which I hadn't been doing at the time. It got me into, learning how to write for social media, like you said, just that change of what was print before, and learning how to stylize things a little bit differently, and how to start utilizing social media. That I had to learn so much on my own and become my own complete PR firm. Whether it was graphic design, whether it was editing, whether it was just all the things that we do now that we take kind of just as par for the course. There wasn't a roadmap for us 10 years ago.
Facts.
There wasn't any kind of roadmap for us. You were just watching people do it and figuring it out as building the plane while you were flying it. So, that really stabilized things for me, and I think it was the springboard for a number of opportunities that I got, coming after that. Just being in that position and having that name behind me.
Yeah, man. I deal with a lot of that in the wrestling industry. A lot of times people think, "Oh, okay, you just got a podcast," and then even before I was, especially before I was with the Ringer, I would explain to people like, "No, like I went to school for this. I went to school for the wrestling realm was created because me and Dwayne wanted to practice what we was learning in the classroom. Both discovered we were both wrestling fans, and I had a show with my cousin, but he messed his life up, to say the least. So, I was, just doing the show by myself, and I'm like, wait, oh yeah, this is the guy right here. And we took like the parts, lighting, shooting, editing, everything we learned in classroom, we put it into the craft. So, but a lot of times people don't understand that because everybody don't do their research, so I could definitely, relate. You was the first Black daily sports radio host in New Orleans. Talk about that and what that means to you.
Yeah. In 2019, at the start of that year, I was getting some opportunities at the sports station WODT in New Orleans to fill in. And at the time, I didn't even realize that we had never had one. There had never been a Black daily host of a major show in New Orleans. You figure it's New Orleans, it's a city that's 60+% Black, sports crazy town. This should have happened. But that summer when they first approached me and were like, "Are you interested in doing a show?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm interested in doing a show. I'd love to do a show." But then I found out, I started talking to my mentor, Ro Brown, who was the first Black sports anchor in New Orleans. And he loves to tell me all the time. He's like, people ask me if I was an affirmative action hire. I say, yeah, I was affirmative action hires. Like there wasn't anybody before me. They were looking for a Black person. I was one of the few Black people working in communications at my university, and they picked me. And he's like, but I don't have no problem with that because I was good. And that was the kind of approach he told me to take. It was like, don't worry about the fact that there hadn't been one. Because I was like, why me? That's what the kind of thing you think about is when you're first is, how do I end up being first? There were people who were probably better than me who should have gotten their shot. But he was like, don't worry about that. It's like, you get to do it now. And so that kind of made me really excited. And I wanted to do something that nobody expected, that nobody had done in New Orleans before. Everything was Saint-centric. Everything was LSU-centric, football-focused. And I had this passion for basketball first and foremost, but also just for these deeper conversations in sports. I wanted to talk about sports law. I wanted to talk about gender politics in sports. I want to talk about stadium financing. I want to talk about all of those things. And 2019 ended up being the perfect time to do that for all the things that ended up happening in 2020. I debuted in July of 2019, and the pandemic hits, and there was no sports. So conversation about sports changed completely. You couldn't talk about games, so you had to talk about other things, and that was in my wheelhouse. So
Mm-hmm.
that made me just really get deep into, the kind of guests that I wanted to start getting, taking more time on research, like you talk about. I wanted to know as much as I could to make a great conversation on the air and not get to that point where, you get into a lot of sports radio and I got one question, I got two questions, I got three questions, go to the break.
Yeah.
And it's just that back and forth to get to the next break. Well, for me, I started keeping my guests for 2, 3 segments because I wanted to have a conversation and some follow up. And that became, how I distinguish my show from other people. And look, there was a lot of pushback. I had people tell me that I needed to be grateful. You know what I mean? Like when you get
Of
that,
course.
or that, I needed to change my subject matter, what I could and words that I could not use that would come from management to tell me what I couldn't say and what I couldn't talk about. And then I got, I got threats. I got, cursed out on air by people when I said things that they didn't like. But I was in a space where I felt like if I'm gonna go down being me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna do what I do. And so, you know, what happened was, we were really starting to pick up and getting some good traction. But like a lot of things that happened during the pandemic, stations started cutting back because the money wasn't there. The advertising dollars weren't flowing. And so the station ended up shutting down. But and it was like it was funny because I was setting up for my show that day and I had my guests and everything lined up. And they were like 40 minutes from air. And they called me up and they're like, yeah, the station's shutting down today. So you got no show. And it was it was that quick. And everything that I'd done over 11 months was just gone that fast. But in that time, I changed so much of the way people conversed about sports in New Orleans because then I started getting all these calls from people who now were starting their own podcasts, people who were starting their own shows on other network, local outlets and stuff. And they started calling me. They're like, "OG, we need you to help us do this because I want to do this now because you did it." And that part that somebody else decided they wanted to do it because they saw me do it, whether they saw it and said, well, if he can do it, I can, or they said, because he did it, I can. Either way, I was good with it. That there were more people who wanted to get into it and feel like, okay, I can be myself in this. I can be authentically myself and not worry about it. And that was, to me, whether the show had gone on forever or not, that's the thing that I'll always be proud of it for.
Man, as you should, because it's you want to leave the business better than what you found it, and for you to be able to go out there and really change the way people talk about sports and really, critical thinking. You think back when we was in school and you give a teacher an answer and they were like, "No, but how did you get it?" There's a lot of critical thinking. I love the fact that you was talking about stadium finance. We don't hear about that. I wish you was here in Baltimore. Maybe we could have convinced them to get us a better arena instead of redoing that one so we can get WrestleMania here. But like we're the forgotten city in between Philly and DC, so we
I
can't
love Baltimore though. I love Baltimore.
I'm glad we can't get the All-Star games, we can't get the Super Bowl, we can't get nothing. But the Heart in the Paint podcast, man. When did you decide it was time to start it? Like, I know you started in 2020, and the thing is, let's be real, right? We've seen a lot of podcasts start in 2020. But yours is still continuing for obvious reasons. This is what you do. But what made you decide, okay, now is the time?
Well, like when the show ended, I took a week off. That was it. I said, I got to keep doing this because I didn't
put
know
something
what else
in the group chat. I feel like you put something in the group chat around that time.
Yeah, I was like, I'm doing this, and I was, I was like, I'm going 5 days a week, and I was doing 2 hours a day, 5 days a week when I first started because I didn't know any other way to do it. I was doing it just like my radio show essentially. So I would, do an hour by myself, and then I would have a guest, and that was a lot. that was a lot. Because when you go on 5 days a week, 2 hours a day, and I was just putting it out constantly. But I was that passionate, and like we didn't have nothing else to do. It was locked inside. So it was like every day I'll get on the phone and talk to people and do the podcast. But that again, now I had the freedom to say anything because I didn't have any SEC regulations, and I didn't have any worries about advertisers. So it got to be more of myself. And that first year, like, you come out the gate, and I was really fortunate to win Louisiana Sports Writer Association Podcast of the Year the first year.
Yeah.
The first year. And that was a shock. Again, it's just things were lining up. And you try to think that you're smart enough to have figured these things out on your own. But I was, the effort was important on my end. But there's a lot of people and a lot of things that were beyond my control that also played a role in pushing me towards those things. So it was the perfect convergence of me having the willingness at that time to do it, the time to do it, and then just, people being available to me. So I threw everything I had into that. And now it's grown into more than the podcast. It's become kind of like, it's a brand now. It's a brand, and it's growing, and it's going to take some time for it to get to where I want it to be. But I think people now, understand that Hard to Paint was my podcast, but it's also the kind of the way, it's just the way I approach the conversations. I approach the topics. I'm going to be aggressive. I'm going to get to the bottom of it. I'm going to have as raw and open a conversation as possible, but also keep it at a high level. And I think that is something, that focus, the title keeps me focused. I know I have to bring it because that's what people expect. I can't just do fluff. I can't do glad handing pat on the back pieces, for teams and stuff. I have to be honest. That doesn't mean that I'm fake. That doesn't mean that I look for clicks or controversy, but it keeps me focused on what the lane that I chose is, and to be true to that. And I think that that consistency is so important to me in the podcast and the way that I approach it.
And then, so now you also was one of the founding members of MLBBro.com. Shout out to Rob Parker. I got he was in, what was this, 2021, I think. Yeah, he was in DC. And so one of the things about Rob is he come into a town, tell everybody come out, and we got a chance to, have a mix of veterans and rookies out for a good lunch. How did you all connect and create this great website? Because baseball is my favorite sport, like outside of wrestling, of course. And we've seen that it's not as like growing up. Man, I mean, I had Ken Griffey Jr., Fred McGriff, Barry Bonds, Tony Gwynn, so many people. Now it's not as many players that's African American. I think there's even might be one or two teams that don't even have an African American player on their team. But I think y'all have done a phenomenal job in shedding light on those players that are and that's doing well, or just bringing awareness. So how did this opportunity come about?
Yeah, I first met Rob at NABJ when it was in DC.
Okay.
And so he just happened to be standing outside the hotel. I think it was after one of the receptions that we were all
Sound
leaving.
like Rob.
And he was just posted up. And I went over to him and I shook his hand and we talked for a second, exchanged information. And then a few, about a year later, then Rob was like, "Hey, I'm gonna be in New Orleans." And like he does, if he's in the town, he's like, "Come in, we're gonna have a meal together." Cool. So I went down and had breakfast with Rob. And he's like, I'm putting together this website about baseball. And I'm like you, basketball is my passion. Baseball is my love. Okay. I love baseball. Love it. And, I grew up huge Yankees fan. Dave Winfield is my favorite player of all time. I got a bunch of Yankee stuff behind me. And
I'm an Orioles fan, but I'm gonna let
you know,
that slide.
look, hey,
Y'all won the series this weekend.
Judge get 2 homers on Easter Sunday.
This is that's his court. We've got to
But
accept it.
but hey, Sid Mullins is a fantastic player. Y'all got some talent on that team. It's just it's young. It's a really
Yeah.
young team.
Mhm.
And finally y'all got some hope after about a decade of just come on, man.
Yeah.
Come on, man. Since
The
Adam
bounce
Jones
back.
left.
Well, the
It had
bounce
been,
back is quicker this time, right? Because we
yes.
had, even the Melvin Mora years after,
Yeah.
who I think is one of the most overrated players, Cal Ripken's years. There was a long stretch of losing, but then we went from we had some hopeful seasons from 2012 to 20. You could throw 17 in there, even though they fell off, but you could still throw it in there. And so to bounce back in 2021 and actually be watchable, it's not as bad as we thought. Like, here we go again. So
I
I
was
can't
worried that they
complain
were
too
gonna
much.
ship Sid out. That's what I was worried about.
Me
That they were
too.
gonna ship him out. And I was like, dude, that's a 30-30 guy right there. What you doing?
Right?
And still on a relatively good contract. I mean, come on,
Mm-hmm.
that's a team friendly deal. But Rob was like, I want to do this thing and focus on black ball players, and I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I had seen the game fall off as far as black participation and representation in the big leagues, and I wanted to do something about it. And so, there wasn't really a game plan when we first started talking about it. We didn't know who was going to fill what roles or how we were going to figure this out. And it just kind of became from Rob's vision. And we just kind of just were like, well, I can do this. Okay, well, you do that. And I can do this. Okay, well, you do that. And it started out with 9 of us. And now
Okay.
there's 56.
Wow.
56. Like we went from 9 to 56 in 2 years. And to this year to be able to partner with Major League Baseball, for them to come to us and say we want to have a partnership. And now our content is on MLB TV, it's on MLB.com. And you just start to see the Players Alliance has embraced us.
Mm-hmm.
CC Sabathia has co-signed us. LaTroy Hawkins is on our staff. Gary Sheffield Jr. works with us. So we have like some really good parts, and we're getting embraced by black ball players. We've been at the All-Star game the last 2 years. We've been at the World Series. We've been in all these different places. And now you're starting to see players, giving us shout outs and things like that because they want to have their stories told.
Facts.
And they want to have more black people too. They would love to see more black players on the bench too. I don't care what work environment you are in. If you're the only one at some place, it's difficult. If you're the only woman in the office, if you're the only black man in the office, if you're the only, it's always a little bit harder because you need somebody who understands what you've been through to give you some shorthand. You see it with Latino ball players, you see it with Asian ball players. There's every Southern ball players, wherever people are from, they congregate. And I think that was, you want to be understood and you want to understand why the game maybe doesn't have a place for you. It felt like for a good while that baseball was legislating the black player out through the rules changes and some of the things that were going on, that the interest in Latin America, the interest in Asia, because they were cheaper. We weren't seeing the interest in black athletes for baseball. And now I think baseball understands, again, that you always need talent and just the basic tenets of capitalism. You always need a pool, and you want that pool to be as deep and as broad as possible. And you're starting to see the game, the stolen base is coming back. The triple is coming back. You start to see guys put the ball in play, and you have that wide range. We have a black catcher again.
Yeah.
We have a black catcher again. Like, we had like 5 or 6 of them in the 80s and 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went maybe 15 years and there wasn't one at all in baseball. And now we got one again. And it's just to get to that point where you almost have every position covered again, where there's a brother at every position. Like, these are minor wins, but they're wins. And we just want to be part of this game that we have always been a part of. You can't tell the story of baseball without talking about black people. We have been there from jump. And I think that, there were people who didn't understand what we were trying to do when we started. They thought it was something to separate us. No, it's to sell the game and to sell people whose stories need to be told. we love the game of baseball. We want more people to play the big game of baseball. And it's remarkable how many non-black people enjoy the site and come for the information because they love those players too growing up. And they love those players now. And they're fans of them and want to see more of them. So for us to be able to do that and to provide that, we love doing it. I'm excited about it. And it just feels like it's just going to get bigger and better.
Man, I have to tell you, thank you, as a baseball fan. Thank you, because like I said, I definitely appreciate the content. I appreciate the awareness and the spotlight that has been on Black players. And, we want to see, these players get their just due, because I would love to be able to ride around Baltimore City and see little kids playing baseball. Unfortunately, some of the very fields I played on are now just grass because it's it's just not the interest there no more. And I was talking to a buddy of mine. He was saying like, yeah, they've trying to get a 9-inning game going, and I was like, I would love that. We always everybody, let's go play basketball, let's go play football. I want to play baseball. But before we get out of here, David, I want to ask you, when you look back over your career and you see everything, what is the thing? When did you have that breaking through the glass ceiling moment? When was that moment came where you're like, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to do, and I'm pretty good at this?
Okay, there are two.
Okay.
There are two. The first one was when I was a young reporter, and I got to interview Dr. J. And when I was done, he stood up and he shook my hand and he said, "Good job, young man. You asked some really good questions." I ran to the news truck, got on the phone and called my dad long distance. It was like, "Dr. J said I was good." That was all, at that point, I was 24 years old. That was all I needed to hear. Dr. J said I was good. So that was the first time that I was like, okay, this is real. Like I talked to Dr. J. I didn't fan out. You know what I mean? I didn't turn into a kid. I did my job and he said I was good at it. And he didn't have to do that. He could have just been like, next. He got up and shook my hand. So that was the first one. The other one, honestly, it was a conversation. It was a conversation with a friend of mine. His name's Chris Connor. And Chris just started getting into hosting. He now has his own podcast and he hosts these really popular Twitter spaces on the Pelicans. And Chris was just a dude who wrote for a long time, didn't really know that he wanted to be in front of, to have a voice and to have his face on. And he would just text me and be like, "Grubb, I think I want to do this. I think I'm, what do you say?" And we would just have conversations about it. Not really me telling him what to do, just talking about the business and how to find yourself in it. And then when he started doing it, he called me again. And it was just, he had me on his first show. And we've had, we've done appearances since then, but just the conversations off site of him being like, I wouldn't do this if it wasn't for you. You're my brother in this, and it's a family thing in that regard. And that, for me, cemented my purpose. Like you said, that we leave it better than we found it. Yeah. And so I know that Chris represents however many people, have been impacted by what I do. And like I said, whether it's just him or if it's 5 or if it's 50 or 5,000 when I'm done, I know that what I did was bigger than just me, and it wasn't just me speaking into the void. And so that, whether I get rich off of this, I want to take care of my daughter and take care of myself doing what I love to do. But if I never get rich, if all I can do is take care of myself and make a living doing this, and that's what at the end of the day is that people remember it and that it was good.
Yes.
That's enough. That's enough.
Man, wow. I'm so glad we got a chance to do this, man. Definitely appreciate everything that you do, everything that you've contributed to this business. Let the people know where they can find you and get in contact with you.
Yeah, at DM Grubb on Instagram and Twitter is the easiest way to get at me. I just took over the bird rights. So we got it from SB Nation. They let it loose. And so we took it over. So I'm it's now part of Hard to Paint Sports Media. And so you can check that out. Of course, the Hard to Paint podcast. And there's going to be a lot more coming. I'm going to be producing some more podcasts for other people this year and adding that. And we're going to try to grow this out and really turn Hard to Paint into something that's not just about me. That continues to develop the next generation of voices.
Nice. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure y'all follow David. Everything he's been doing has been phenomenal. And, you know, especially if you're a baseball fan, but also, you know, if you need communications advice, this is the person to go to. You know, he's done it all. He's well-rounded in this business. David, I definitely appreciate you coming on here, man. Appreciate your time. And I really can't wait for everybody to hear this conversation because it's gonna be definitely something that's inspirational. But ladies and gentlemen, make sure y'all follow me at Brian H. Waters. Make sure you can get a shirt, including the one I got. Well, the one I got on ain't available no more, but it's from foryourwear.com. You can get a Breaking Through Glass Ceiling shirt and other podcasters and wrestlers and other content creators. Shout out to the homie Blue. Until the next time, folks, do not let anybody place a ceiling above your success. So long, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the podcast, ladies and gentlemen. You can support this podcast by going on foryourwear.com. Go to personalities and see Brian H. Waters. There you can get Breaking Through Glass Ceilings t-shirt or a hoodie, as well as a No Ceilings Above Success t-shirt. Go to foryourwear.com. Make sure you also check out some of the other podcasters and professional wrestlers as well.